Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that we currently have 2 applications out for the King's Indian on iPhone and on Android. Check them out. Welcome back to chessopenings.com. In today's video, we'll take a look at a game as part of our Blitz series in which the Queen's Indian opening was featured. In this game, quite a few instructive things happen, and we'll get a chance to learn more about the opening as well as chess as a whole. Let's take a look. Welcome back to chessopenings.com. In today's video, we'll take a look at a game which I played in Blitz against a player on chess.com by the name of Ram2300. In this game, I was rated about 20 to 30 rating points higher than my opponent, and we began with the moves d4, knight f6, pawn to c4, and now pawn to e6. Now, in the video entitled The Strongest Reply to d4, I've explained that I believe this is the best option that black has in reply to the move pawn to d4. The basic idea is that if white plays the move knight to c3, black can play what is known as the Nimzo-Indian with the move bishop to b4. But disregarding the name Nimzo-Indian for a moment, the basic idea is that once the bishop reaches the b4 square, it's going to be quite difficult for white to achieve the move pawn to e4. For example, if he tried it now, black could reply with knight takes e4, taking advantage of the pin. Now, because this move bishop to b4 ends up being a little bit problematic for white to face, white often doesn't play knight to c3 for some time. Instead, he may play knight f3 or he may play g3. And in this game, I played the move knight f3, which I believe is the strongest reply to the strongest reply. Now, black played pawn to b6, so he's still remaining flexible with the development of this bishop. So if I play knight c3, he can still play bishop b4. And in the meantime, he's still preparing to play bishop b7 as prophylaxis against the move pawn to e4. Prophylaxis is a name for preventative measures, and it's kind of a fancy term that was introduced by Nimzovich in his book My System, but it basically means preventing the opponent's plan. So he's been playing bishop b7 to stop me from expanding in the center with e4. I play the move pawn to g3. Black plays bishop to b7, bishop to g2, bishop to e7, castles, castles, and now I played a move which I have only studied many years ago and haven't brushed up on. I played rook to e1, and I remember that there were some very basic tactical ideas associated with this move, but I couldn't quite remember what all of them were. Essentially, if white plays the move knight c3 here, knight e4 has a very good reputation for black and basically leads to quite a drawish position. So in the past, I've played either the move pawn to d5, which is a temporary pawn sacrifice here, or rook e1 is another option which has become popular recently. Now my opponent played d6. Of course, now if he plays knight to e4, probably the move knight f to d2 would be my guess as a move which would be quite strong here. So instead he plays d6, and now knight c3, and now he played knight e4. And here I couldn't remember what the key idea was for white, why this is supposed to be better now that we've inserted rook e1 to d6. But it turns out that the idea is, if I play queen to c2, now if he plays f5, I have knight d2, and he's got some problems securing this knight. He's going to have to play d5, blocking the bishop in. And if he takes on c3, I have a very powerful and unexpected move, knight to g5, which creates a double threat. I'm threatening both to play queen takes h7 mate, and I'm threatening to take on b7. So he would have to take here, and now I would probably play bishop takes g5, queen takes g5, and bishop takes g2, winning material as a result, because both the knight and the rook are hanging here, and there's nothing to do about the rook there. Now, the reason it's important to throw in rook e1 first in order for this to work is if white plays knight c3 and then knight e4 without having inserted rook to e1, now the same idea, queen c2, knight takes, knight g5, this same exact idea which worked before doesn't work, because after knight takes e2 check, now I can't play king h1 because of bishop takes g2, which is check, and so I'm missing that critical idea of bishop takes b7. And if I take with the queen, now I'm no longer threatening mate, so again he can take here. But after rook to e1, as I played in the game, d6, knight c3, knight to e4. Now after the move queen c2, the same idea, knight takes c3, knight g5. Now knight takes e2 check is no problem because the rook can capture, and now the tactics are not disturbed. There's still the threat of queen takes h7, and still the threat of bishop takes g2, and no way for black to get out of it with check. So I actually missed this in the game and simply played knight d2 after my opponent played queen c2, and so basically threw away the whole point of rook to e1. My opponent simply took on c3, attacking my queen. So now I had to take b takes c3. He took on g2, king takes g2 was played, and after c5 I already felt that black has equalized the game. I mean, we've traded off two minor pieces. My pawn structure is slightly damaged. I still have a little bit of extra space in the center to compensate for this, and there's nothing really major going on in this position, so white should be fine. But I played the move pawn to e4, knight to c6, d5, knight to a5, queen g4, just trying to spice things up. Why not throw the queen out there and see what happens? e5 as I was attacking the e4 pawn. h4 was played. Again, just trying to keep things spicy. King to h8, rook to b1, queen to c8. I refused the queen trade, again, trying to keep some complications on the board. And after f5, I felt that my position was now slightly worse, but I was willing to take the risk in order to create some kind of complications. And certainly here, white should capture e takes f5, rook takes f5, queen e2, and I'm slightly worse, as he now has the open f-file, a little bit more scope there, but it'll be hard for him to take advantage of it. Instead, still going for the maximum potential of some kind of disruption, I played knight f3. Maybe I can sink this knight into g5 and then into e6, or mate him on h7 or something. He played g6, very decent move. Queen to h6, bishop to f6, knight g5, bishop takes g5, bishop takes g5. I feel that somewhere around here black is veering off track just a little bit, because all of a sudden I feel like white is slightly better. But let's just continue. Queen d7, h5, still playing for some attack. Queen f7 was played. H takes g6, queen takes g6, queen takes g6, h takes g6, and now I quickly played bishop e7. Only later did I realize, oh my goodness, after the move rook to f7, which he played, in fact, I can't take this pawn on d6, because after knight takes e4, he not only regains the pawn, but my bishop is also under attack, and it's trapped. So immediately after bishop to e7, I felt a little lame about this move. It turns out that had I inserted rook to h1 check, I had better chances, because if king g7, there's a skewer. Bishop h6 check attacks the king, and now once the king moves, I can pick up the rook. And if he plays king to g8, I can start some counterattack by bringing the rooks into the h-file. Rook h7 check. And in fact here I even have a move like rook to e7 check, and this could be very strong with rook takes e5 discovery check coming. But as it just so happens, I played bishop to e7, he played rook to f7, and now I had to admit my mistake. I played rook h1 check, king to g7, the bishop had to come back to g5, and now I've got hanging pawns everywhere. My position has got to be pretty much lost. Black took on e4, I played rook to h6, rook h8 was played. Still, I'm just trying to shovel pieces near the king and see if I can create any ideas. Rook takes h6 check, bishop takes h6 check here, king to g8, rook to h4, rook to h7 was played, king to f1, knight takes c4. And now I'm a big fan of this principle. When we have losing positions, we've got to keep playing in a way that is most likely to frustrate the opponent, the moves which he least wants to see. So I went for rook takes e4 based on the idea that all rook endings are drawn. Of course, I think after rook takes h6, rook takes c4, black has very, very, very good winning chances in this endgame, but it is a rook endgame, and so he has to display some finesse. In this position, I believe perhaps he should try to bring his rook towards the d1 square, but after king e2, he still has some problems to solve, and he needs to activate his king, probably bringing it to the f5 square. But after rook takes e4, my opponent played b5, which is actually quite an excellent move here, and I still have to deal with what I'm doing with this bishop on h6. I played the move bishop to g5. The rook became active after all with the move rook to h1, king to g2, rook to a1 was played, and now, simply not knowing what to do, I just played pawn to a4, rook takes a4. I've got 4 pawns on the board. My opponent has 6 pawns on the board. His minor piece is better than my minor piece because the knight is on a very protected outpost. There's a pass pawn on a7. It's looking pretty hopeless, but we can still try to play the move which the opponent least wants to see. I simply played bishop e7, king to f7, he replied. I played bishop d8, rook a3, attacking this pawn, rook h4, trying to create some counterplay with rook to h7 check. My opponent played king to g7, bishop to e7 was played, rook takes c3. So now I'm down 3 pawns. Well, g4, trying to bring another point close to the king, b4, g5, b3, and somewhere in here my opponent finally cracks and makes a tiny mistake. I played bishop to f6 check, king to f7, rook to h7 check, king to f8, rook to h8 check, king to f7, rook to h7 check, king to e8. Again, I'm just trying to keep the game going. Rook to e7 check, and now finally a stroke of enormous luck here. King to d8, a terrible blunder, which not only loses a pawn after rook takes e5 check, which I played, but also now opens up the bishop in such a way that if I'm able to give a check with my rook next move, and I'm able to do it, then I'm actually going to be attacking the rook on c3 as well. So this is a terrible move, king to d8. If only black would have seen the danger and played king to f8, I actually would be running out of checks here, and I would have nothing better but to play rook takes a7, b2, and this pawn is very close to home. Analysis reveals that basically I can give a few more checks. Okay, and pretty quickly I'm going to run out of checks, but rook e7 check, king f8. I get behind the pawn at some point, but he'll just play rook c1. The pawn is already protected. The pawn is going to make it to b1. I'm going to have to give up my rook, and that's going to be lights out in this game. But fortunately for me, and unfortunately for my opponent, perhaps having to do with the time pressure, we've got g4, b4, g5, b3, bishop f6, king f7, rook h7, king f8, rook h8, king to f7, check, king e8, check here, and then we've got this blunder, king to d8, rook takes e5 check, king to d7 was played. It's not going to help if he plays any other move. In all cases, he's going to run into this problem. Rook e7 check. Now I'm attacking the rook. If he walks away to c8, I'll take the rook. And if he plays king d8, which he played, I'll get my rook out of dodge first with check, with rook takes a7 check here, king c8, and now bishop takes c3, and suddenly the time scramble has yielded a full rook for me, and I'm winning all of a sudden. Huge reversal of events. White played b2. I gave up the bishop with bishop takes b2. Knight takes b2. And now the time scramble continued. Rook g7, pawn to c4, rook takes g6, king to c7, rook takes d6, a terrible time pressure mistake, king takes d6, g6, g7, c3, g7, c2, a queen here, and the game went on for some time, in fact, but it just turned out in this game that I ended up winning on time with just a couple seconds up. but we got a chance to see some defensive technique on my part. Again, the principle being that in losing positions, we just keep playing the move which we believe our opponent would least like to see. And in different situations, that's going to be different. Sometimes it's going to mean keeping an attack going, as I did in this game. I was just throwing pieces near the king and seeing what I could do. Other times it might mean a stodgy defense that makes it difficult for the opponent to break through. But in this game, thanks to the time pressure, and perhaps a little bit having to do with how I handled the attack, I eventually managed to get the mistake out of my opponent and then win the time scramble, allowing me to win the game. Again, I really look forward to producing the other videos where we have a little bit more detail and we can go into more detail on the openings and give more instructive value. But I still hope that these shorter videos are of value to players who want to see a game in action, get to know a little bit of the thinking processes and the ideas and strategies which I employ in my regular games. And I hope that you've learned a little something about the Queen's Indian, the Nimzo Indian, and again, that perhaps that attacking technique which I use to keep the opponent on his toes has been of some value to you. That's all for today, and we'll see you again soon. Before you go, if you have an opportunity, be sure to check out that we have 3 applications available on the Queen's Gambit Decline, available for iPhone and for Android. Check them out.